I am Commander Designation Vrethon, Signals Authority at Relay Thresh-Kaur, and I have been logging transmissions for 11 rotations without sleep. I say this not as a complaint. I say it so that whoever reads this record understands the condition from which it was produced, so they may weigh my interpretations accordingly and find them sound. Everything that follows is accurate. I have not embellished. I have, if anything, understated. The recalculation advance departed Kethara Sanctum Gate on the 417th cycle of the current standard year. 3,412 vessels, by the final muster count that crossed my relay board. I received that figure the way I receive all figures that flow through Thresh-Kaur, logged it, verified it against the formation roster, confirmed the sum. The mechanism does not traffic in approximations. 3,412. The number was precise because we are precise. We have always been precise. Precision is the entire structure of what we are. The advance carried that number outward on a heading toward the Veth threshold. The boundary zone where, 43 cycles prior, our long-range sensor grid had recorded an anomaly. A vessel, unknown configuration, unknown origin, moving on a bearing that, if sustained, would bring it to within 9 light hours of the mechanism's outer relays, of which Thresh-Kaur is the deepest and most exposed. I had seen the original anomaly file. Every signals officer at every relay in the outer grid had received a copy. Standard protocol. The file was 17 lines. It described a contact reading of irregular dimensions, approximately 38 kilometers in primary hull extent, though that figure carried a 40% confidence margin because the contact sensor returns were unstable. The file noted that the vessel did not match any entry in the mechanism's classification archive, which at that time held complete profiles of 11,209 distinct vessel types from 243 civilizations. It noted that the contact's drive signature was inconsistent with known propulsion principles, and that its thermal output was anomalously low for a hull of that scale. It recommended a recalculation level response, which, in the mechanism's doctrine, meant a force sufficient to classify, engage, and neutralize the anomaly before it could approach closer to sanctum space. 3,412 ships was the recalculation level response. I remember reading that figure in the muster file and finding it correct. The mechanism's doctrine for unknown contacts is built on a simple principle: classify first, then engage with force proportionate to the classification. If you cannot classify, you engage with maximum preponderance until classification becomes possible from the wreckage. 3,000 vessels had never been insufficient against an unclassified contact. The largest undocumented fleet we had previously encountered in the mechanism's operational history numbered 207 ships. 3,000 vessels against one anomaly was not, by any reasonable calculus, insufficient. This is what I believed at the start of the 417th cycle. I no longer believe it. I have stopped believing in reasonable calculus as it applies to this vessel. The first transmissions from the recalculation advances forward contact screen reached Thresh-Kaur at what I will designate hour 0. We use hours in this log because the engagement has lasted long enough that cycles have become unwieldy units. At hour 0, the forward screen, 82 vessels of the advance deployed in a wide dispersal net ahead of the main formation, made visual and sensor contact with the anomaly. The anomaly was a single ship. This I already knew from the initial file, but there is a difference between knowing a thing in a file and receiving the direct sensor packages from 82 vessels that have placed their instruments on the same object simultaneously. The contact reads were consistent across all 82 platforms. One vessel. Primary hull extent, 38.4 kilometers. Secondary structures. What the forward screen's analysts tentatively identified as weapons mounts, engine blocks, and what may have been hangar superstructure, added perhaps 4 kilometers in total cross-section. The hull surface was difficult to characterize precisely. The forward screen's lead analyst, a mechanism officer whose designation I will record as Sensor Commander Thresh-Kaur, noted in her transmission that the hull appeared heavily worked, not in the sense of structural damage, but in the sense of accumulated modification. Layers of added plating, reconfigured emitter arrays, scorching that had been partially repaired and then re-scorched. She described it as a vessel that had been in continuous operation for a very long time without ever being taken out of service for comprehensive refit. At hour 0, the vessel was holding position. It was not maneuvering. It was not broadcasting. Its weapons, if those were weapons mounts, were not cycling to active readiness. By every sensor metric the forward screen could apply, the vessel was simply present. Sensor Thresh-Kaur recommended that the forward screen hold at maximum engagement range while the Advance's main body closed to a secondary perimeter. Standard protocol for unclassified contacts. You do not approach into unknown weapons range until you have a classification. You wait. You observe. You build the archive entry. At hour 1, the first classification attempt began. The mechanism's classification system works on a principle that has served us for 800 years. Every vessel has a fixed sensor profile, a unique pattern of electromagnetic emissions, gravitational distortion, thermal output, drive field frequency, and hull reflection coefficients. No two civilizations build hulls from the same materials in the same configurations with the same drive physics. If you observe a vessel for long enough, typically between 2 and 7 minutes of sustained full spectrum scanning, you can build a complete sensor profile. Once you have the profile, you have the classification. Once you have the classification, you have the engagement parameters. What it will do, what it can do, how it will respond to what you do to it. Classification is not merely a bureaucratic exercise for the mechanism. It is the entire foundation of how we fight. Our weapons systems do not simply fire at a target, they fire at a target's classification. The optimal projectile pattern for a mass driver vessel is different from the optimal pattern for an energy weapon platform. The optimal engagement distance for a vessel with long-range beam weapons is different from the optimal distance for a vessel carrying mass artillery. To engage without classification is to fight randomly. We do not fight randomly, we have never needed to. At hour 1, the forward screen's 82 vessels applied full-spectrum scanning to the contact for a sustained period of 8 minutes. The sensor profile they obtained was filed and transmitted to Thresh-Kaur at hour 1 plus 11 minutes. I received it and ran it through the Classification Archive's matching system. The archive contains entries built from 11,209 vessel types, entries precise enough that a match can typically be confirmed within 30 seconds. The matching system returned no result in 30 seconds. I waited. At 2 minutes, it returned a partial match, a hull reflection coefficient that loosely resembled the type space mining platform operated by a civilization called the Vorath Combine, last observed 460 years ago and now extinct. The match confidence was 6%. The system flagged the result as non-actionable. I reported this to the Advance's command ship, Fleet Commander Designation Orith Vaughn, aboard the flagship Calculated Purpose at the center of the formation. Commander Orith Vaughn's response was measured and entirely consistent with protocol. She ordered a second sustained scan at closer range and directed the forward screen to reduce distance from the contact by 30%. At hour 2, the forward screen completed a second scan of 17 minutes duration. A new sensor profile was filed and transmitted. I received the second profile and ran it through the archive's matching system. The match was entirely different from the first profile. Not slightly different, not a variation on the first profile that might be explained by the change in observation angle or the closer range. Entirely different. The hull reflection coefficients, the drive field frequency, the thermal output pattern, all of it had changed. The closest match the archive could find to the second profile was a low-gravity cargo tender used by the Sereth continuity, another extinct civilization, last observed 212 years ago. The match confidence was 4%. I stared at my board for a long time. Then I pulled both profiles side by side and spent 40 minutes with them. I am trained in sensor analysis. It is part of my qualification as a signals officer. I have analyzed sensor profiles from 311 distinct vessel types in my service. What I found in those 40 minutes produced a cold weight in the center of my chest that I did not have a name for at the time. The two profiles were not different readings of the same object. They were readings of two genuinely different objects, except that both profiles had been taken of the same vessel, from the same general angle, using the same instruments, separated by less than an hour. The vessel's sensor profile had changed, not in ways that could be explained by maneuver, temperature variation, or drive output fluctuation. It had changed in the way that a vessel's profile would change if the vessel were, in some fundamental sense, a different vessel. At hour 2 plus 50 minutes, I transmitted this analysis to Fleet Commander Orith Vaughn aboard the Calculated Purpose. Her response arrived at hour 3. She said she had read my analysis and found it interesting. She said that sensor anomalies at extreme range were not unknown, and that the discrepancy likely reflected interference from local stellar phenomena. She ordered a third scan at close range and asked me to cross-reference my findings with the archive's catalog of known sensor interference environments. I spent 3 hours cross-referencing. I found nothing that could explain what I had seen. The local stellar environment at the contact point was unremarkable. No known interference sources. The discrepancy was in the vessel. The vessel's profile had shifted. I filed my cross-reference results and said so. At hour 6, the third scan was completed. The forward screen had, by this point, closed to within standard engagement range, a distance at which the contact's profile should have been unambiguous, interference or otherwise. The third profile arrived at Thresh-Kaur and I ran it through the archive. The third profile did not match the first. It did not match the second. It was, by every metric I could apply, a profile of a third entirely distinct vessel type, or it would have been, if it were a profile of a different vessel. It was a profile of the same vessel, at closer range than either of the prior scans, at a distance where sensor ambiguity is not a credible explanation. The archive's matching system returned the same result as always, non-actionable. I sat in the relay station signal room and understood, not yet fully, but in the first gray shape of understanding, what this meant. The mechanism's entire engagement doctrine is built on classification. Classification is built on the principle that a vessel's sensor profile is fixed. A vessel is made of particular materials, arranged in a particular configuration, with a particular drive system and a particular weapons loadout. These things do not change while you are scanning them. A vessel is what it is. The profile you obtain today is the profile you will obtain tomorrow, from any angle at any range. The profile is the vessel, except this vessel was not returning a fixed profile. It was returning a different profile each time we looked at it. And that meant that every engagement calculation the advance's 3,412 ships had built, every targeting solution, every approach vector, every weapon cycle optimized against a specific expected hull configuration, was built on a classification that the vessel would not be holding by the time the weapons arrived. They were going to fire at where it had been. I do not know exactly when the contact's hull signature changes. I know now, having spent 900 hours at this board, receiving and logging and analyzing everything that has come through, that the cycle appears to be approximately 14 minutes. Every 14 minutes the sensor profile resets, not degrades, not drifts, resets as if the vessel's surface actively reconfigures itself, altering its electromagnetic emission patterns, shifting its reflective coefficients, adjusting its thermal output distribution, until the profile the last scan recorded is no longer accurate. I do not know how this is done. I am a signals officer, not a physicist. I have read everything in the mechanism's archive that touches on adaptive hull materials, variable emission plating, and reconfigurable drive field outputs. None of it comes close to explaining what this vessel does. The closest analogs are theoretical, proposals from mechanism scientists never built, for a ship that could passively cycle through a library of sensor signatures to defeat adversary targeting systems. But the proposals assumed you would need a massive onboard computing architecture to manage the cycling, and a significant power budget to execute it. And even then the proposed cycle time was on the order of 3 hours, not 14 minutes. This vessel cycles in 14 minutes. Whatever it is built from, whatever drives it, I do not know. I do not think the mechanism knows. I do not think the mechanism's archive will ever have an entry for it, because an entry requires a stable profile, and this vessel does not hold one. At hour 7, Fleet Commander Orith Vaughn ordered the recalculation advance to execute its first engagement pass. 3,412 vessels opened fire simultaneously. They had built their targeting solutions from the third sensor profile, the most recent, available, gathered at close range, as clear a picture as the forward screen's instruments could produce. Those solutions specified approach angles, intercept distances, weapons types, and firing sequences optimized against a vessel of the profile's indicated configuration. The weapons officers aboard all 3,000 vessels had those solutions loaded. They were good solutions. Against any other vessel in the archive, they would have been decisive. The third profile was 41 minutes old when the advance fired. In 14-minute cycles, 41 minutes is 3 full resets. The targeting solutions the advance had optimized were optimized against a vessel that no longer had the profile they were optimized against. The weapons struck the space around the contact, and the space behind the contact, and in some cases, the space considerably to the lateral of the contact, because the solutions had also encoded movement predictions based on the third profile's drive field readings, and those predictions were wrong for the same reason. The drive field readings in the third profile were no longer the drive field readings the vessel was currently generating. The advance fired for 40 seconds. The contact did not return fire during that 40 seconds. It did not maneuver evasively. It did not broadcast anything. It continued on the same heading and velocity it had held since hour 0. The weapons simply did not hit it. I received the battle data transmission from the calculated purpose at hour 7 plus 30 minutes. I read it twice. Then I read the embedded sensor logs from the forward screen. The contact had moved, not far, not a dramatic evasive maneuver, just a steady continuation of its existing velocity along its existing heading, and the targeting solutions had placed the fire 500 to 1,200 kilometers behind it. Because the drive field profile they were optimizing against had been generating a different velocity when it was last recorded. Fleet Commander Orith Vaughn's transmissions accompanying the battle data was brief. She said the advance would recalibrate and attempt a second engagement pass. She requested that Thresh-Kaur confirm its relay functionality was nominal, as the command analysis team aboard the calculated purpose had a theory that local sensor interference might be affecting the targeting system's inputs. I confirmed that Thresh-Kaur's relay functionality was nominal. I did not say that I believed sensor interference was not the issue. She was the fleet commander. It was not my place to tell her what I believed. At hour 9, the second engagement pass began. The advance had, in the intervening 2 hours, built new targeting solutions from a fourth sensor scan. Fresh enough, they believed, that the solutions would be current when the weapons arrived. The fourth scan had been completed 12 minutes before the advance fired. 14-minute cycle. The fourth scan's profile was not the profile the contact was currently presenting. Not by much, barely past the inflection point of the reset cycle, but the targeting calculations that had been built on it were sensitive to small variations. Small variations were enough. The second engagement pass was not as wide in its distribution as the first. Some fire struck close enough that the battle data showed impacts in proximity to the contact's hull, impacts that should have registered some damage on the sensor returns if they had connected. The sensor returns showed no damage. The weapons had not made contact with the hull. They had come close. But in space, close does not mean what it means in a ground engagement. The hull was not there when the fire arrived. The contact continued on its heading. At hour 11, the contact fired for the first time. I received the transmission log from the advance's forward screen at hour 11 plus 8 minutes. The log was a burst transmission, not a clean composed report. The formatting indicated that the officer sending it was doing so under time pressure. The forward screen comprised 82 vessels. Those 82 vessels, having spent 11 hours at closest approach to the contact, were the most exposed elements of the advance. The contact destroyed 47 of them in 6 minutes. The transmission described the weapons as kinetic-based, high-velocity mass delivered in sequences that the forward screen's point defense systems could not intercept at the fire rate they were encountering. The sequences were not random. The forward screen's tactical officer had enough time in his burst transmission to note that the firing was precise. Each sequence targeted a different vessel. Each sequence was individually calibrated. The contact appeared to be working through the forward screen in a systematic order, rather than sweeping across them in a wide pattern. Systematic. I noted that word when I read it. I have thought about it since. The contact did not sweep. It worked. There is a difference between those two things. A weapon system that sweeps is trying to hit as many things as possible as fast as possible. A weapon system that works is trying to neutralize targets in a specific sequence for reasons. The 47 vessels the contact destroyed in the first 6 minutes of engagement were the 47 vessels that had been most consistent in their scanning. The vessels whose collected sensor data, aggregated over 11 hours, gave the most complete picture of the contact's hull. The vessels that had done the best job of trying to classify it were the ones neutralized first. That observation arrived for me at hour 11 plus 8 minutes, as a cold certainty rather than a reasoned conclusion. I wrote it in my log immediately. I do not know if anyone will read this and find the observation useful. I hope someone does. The forward screen lost 35 more vessels in the following 4 hours. As the contact worked through the remainder, those last 35 were harder to neutralize. The contact was now at the center of the main formation, and the main formation was firing everything it had. Those last 35 vessels were mixed into the fire from 3,000 ships, and the contact had to discriminate between them and the larger mass of the advance. It did. All 35 were destroyed. None of the main formation's fire hit the contact. The main formation was firing solutions built on the fourth scan's profile, the same solutions. They had been cycling through for 2 hours, refreshed with each new scan attempt, and the contact's profile was resetting every 14 minutes. At hour 15, Fleet Commander Orith Vaughn transmitted a full tactical assessment to Thresh-Kaur and to the Mechanism's Sanctum Command network. The assessment was long. The summary was not. The recalculation advance had failed to score a confirmed kill in 11 hours of engagement with a single vessel. The forward screen, which represented 2.4% of the advance's total strength, had been eliminated. The contact was now moving through the main formation at a speed that had increased from its original approach velocity, and the formation's ability to generate fire was being degraded by the contact's presence in its center. Ships on the far sides of the formation could not fire toward the contact without putting friendly hulls in the fire path. The contact was not trying to escape. It was moving through the formation. It had a direction. That direction was, by hour 15, clearly oriented through the formation and beyond it, on a bearing that I logged and plotted on my relay's navigation chart. The bearing pointed, if extended, toward the Kethara homestar, through the formation and then toward home. The calculated purpose was in the forward half of the main formation. Fleet Commander Orith Vaughn was 11 light minutes closer to the contact than I was. I calculated this. I noted it. I did not transmit my calculation to her. She had a navigator. She could see her own chart. At hour 22, the contact destroyed the calculated purpose. I received no final transmission from Fleet Commander Orith Vaughn. The ship's destruction was logged in an automated battle data burst from a formation wing vessel that had sensors on the calculated purposes. Position. The burst was terse, a data packet, not a human report. Time of destruction, identification code of the destroyed vessel, method, kinetic impact series. Duration of tech on that specific vessel, 9 seconds. The calculated purpose was 3.4 kilometers bow to stern. 11 seconds was long enough for what the contact's weapons did to a hull. I logged the destruction of the calculated purpose and opened a new command line in my relay system to start routing incoming transmissions to what would now be the advance's acting command element. Whoever had assumed authority in the formation. Standard procedure. Keep the relay running. Keep the transmissions flowing. Keep logging. The advance did not stop fighting. I want this to be clear in the record. 3,000 vessels became 3,000 minus 82, minus the subsequent losses through hour 22, which totaled, by my count, 414 hulls destroyed with the calculated purpose, and the remaining ships did not run. There was no coordinated retreat order. The acting command element, which I eventually identified from transmission headers as a senior vessel commander designated Orith Keth, continued to direct engagement. New targeting solutions were requested from the formation's analytics teams every 20 minutes. Each set of solutions was built on the most recent scan available. Each set of solutions missed. The contact continued to move through the formation, the detail that I found most difficult to hold in my mind, and I have spent 900 hours holding it, is this. The contact did not pursue. When a vessel in the formation attempted to increase distance, the contact did not accelerate after it. It held to its heading. Through the formation, bearing for home. Any vessel that happened to be on that bearing was engaged and destroyed. Any vessel that moved out of the bearing's path was allowed to move. If the entire formation had broken and fled laterally, spread perpendicular to the contact's heading, I believe the contact would simply have continued on that heading and eventually cleared the formation entirely, leaving perhaps 1,000 vessels intact. I believe this. I cannot prove it because no coordinated lateral break was ever ordered. The formation's doctrine is not a doctrine of flight. The mechanism does not build its command officers to break and flee. They kept trying to find the targeting solution that would work. There is no targeting solution that works if you do not know where the vessel will be when your weapons arrive. At hour 60, I received a transmission from Sanctum Command, a direct order, addressed to the acting command element of the recalculation advance, and copied to all relay stations in the outer grid, including Thresh-Kaur. The order directed the advance to hold its current position and maintain engagement while a reinforcement element, the mechanism's second recalculation cadre, 600 additional vessels, the mechanism's largest immediately available reserve, was dispatched from Sanctum Gate. I logged the order. I calculated the travel time for the second recalculation cadre from Sanctum Gate to the contact zone, given current drive capability, approximately 72 hours. Then I looked at the rate at which the advance's hull count was dropping. I did not transmit my calculation to Sanctum Command. I am a relay officer. I relay transmissions. I do not advise Sanctum Command. The second recalculation cadre arrived at hour 134. By hour 134, the recalculation advance's strength had fallen from 3,412 vessels to 1,708. The contact had worked through the main formation on its heading for 62 hours. 1,704 ships had been destroyed in that time, an average of 27.5 hulls per hour. The rate was not constant. It was higher when the formation compressed around the contact, lower when the formation spread. The contact adjusted its engagement rate to the density of targets in its path. The second recalculation cadre entered the combat zone and immediately began building targeting solutions. The cadre's lead analytical officer transmitted a query to Thresh-Kaur at hour 134 plus 15 minutes, asking whether I had accumulated sufficient sensor profile data from the advance's engagements to produce a reliable classification of the contact. I transmitted my reply. I had 87 sensor profiles of the contact, spanning 132 hours of observation. No two profiles were identical. Each profile differed from the preceding one by margins that exceeded the architecture's threshold for treating two profiles as the same vessel type. The contact, by any classification framework the mechanism possessed, presented as 87 different vessel types, none of which matched any archive entry, and the time interval between profile changes appeared to be approximately 14 minutes. The cadre's lead analytical officer did not reply. I imagine he read my transmission and sat with it the way I had sat with the first profile discrepancy. I do not know what he concluded. I know he transmitted a targeting solutions directive to the cadre 40 minutes later. The solutions were built on a profile taken 31 minutes earlier, 2 cycles. The second recalculation cadre engaged at hour 136. Their fire was coordinated with the remaining advance formation, a combined weight of 2,308 vessels firing simultaneously, the most concentrated fire the mechanism had yet brought to bear on the contact. The contact's hull was where the targeting solutions had calculated it would be if it had continued at the velocity and heading recorded by the scan. The contact had indeed continued at very nearly that velocity and heading. The error in the targeting solutions was not large. A matter of alignment shifts consistent with a profile reset and the small behavioral variance that the reset entailed, but the solutions had optimized against a specific hull configuration. The weapons were calibrated to penetrate or deflect in ways that assumed a specific material density distribution in the hull. The hull they struck, if any weapon struck the hull at all, which the battle data was not conclusive about, had a different density distribution than the profile specified. I spent 4 hours analyzing the hour 136 battle data. The conclusion I reached was this: if the contact's hull profile is not fixed, then not only are our targeting solutions chasing a ghost in terms of position, they are also calibrated against a hull configuration that may not be what the hull currently is. The weapons are wrong in 2 ways simultaneously. Wrong about where the hull is. Wrong about what the hull is made of, how it is layered, how energy and mass will interact with it. I do not know if this is the correct analysis. I am not a weapons physicist, but it is what the data suggested to me, and I logged it at hour 140, and I have held to it since. Between hour 60 and hour 134, while waiting for the reinforcement cadre, the surviving formation did not stop fighting. Acting command had, by this point, passed to a vessel commander I will designate Orith Keth, who transmitted regularly to Thresh-Kaur and, I could tell, was a careful and methodical officer. Orith Keth did not pretend the situation was recoverable in the way that Sanctum Command's response seemed to assume. His transmissions were tactical assessments, not reassurances. He had identified the same pattern I had identified: the 14-minute cycle, the profile reset, the twofold error in our targeting solutions, and he was experimenting. He had his analytics team attempt a new approach. Instead of building targeting solutions on a single most recent profile, they attempted to model the cycle. If the profile resets on a 14-minute cadence, and you know the profile at time t, can you predict the profile at time t plus 14 minutes, what the vessel will be presenting next, and build your solutions against the predicted future profile rather than the measured current one? The idea was not bad. It was, in fact, the best idea that came out of the entire engagement, and I want this noted in the record. It did not work, and I want this noted as well, because the reason it did not work tells you something important about this vessel. The 14-minute cycle is not a simple alternation between two states. It is not a rotation through a fixed library of 3 or 5 profiles, cycling in predictable sequence. The analytics team tried to find a pattern in the 87 profiles I had transmitted to them. They looked for repetitions, for partial similarities, for any mathematical relationship between profiles that might let them extrapolate the next one. They found nothing. Each new profile was, as best as they could determine, generated fresh. The hull did not cycle through a fixed sequence of configurations. It generated a new configuration each time. Thresh-Kaur transmitted this finding to me at hour 100. He said it, quietly, in the flat declarative tone of someone reporting a measurement, not drawing a conclusion. I understood what it meant anyway. A hull that cycles through a fixed sequence of configurations could be broken. You would need only to observe enough cycles to map the full library, then build solutions in advance for each entry in the library, and fire when your sensors confirmed which entry was currently active. A hull that generates a fresh configuration every 14 minutes cannot be broken this way. There is no library to map. There is only the current configuration and the 14-minute clock. I did not transmit a reply to Thresh-Kaur. There was nothing useful to say. At hour 200 I conducted a hull count summary. The combined formation, recalculation, advance remnant plus second recalculation cadre stood at 1,041 vessels. The contact had not changed course. It had not changed speed in any sustained way. It was still on the bearing I had plotted at hour 15. Still oriented through the formation and beyond it, toward the Kethara home star. In 200 hours it had covered a significant fraction of the distance that bearing implied. Though it was still far from sanctum space proper, Thresh-Kaur is on that bearing. I have known this since hour 15 when I plotted the course. I have not transmitted this to Sanctum Command because it is on their charts as well, and they are not unintelligent. They know where Thresh-Kaur is. What I have wondered, in the long hours since hour 15, is whether the contact knows that Thresh-Kaur is on that bearing, whether it has logged the relay stations as it has logged everything else, whether its 14-minute cycles include a cycle of data collection and assessment that builds its own archive, whether the contact has a file on Thresh-Kaur. I have no way to know this. The contact has not broadcast in 900 hours. It has not communicated in any mode my instruments can detect. It moves and it fires and it works through whatever is in its path, and it does not say anything. At hour 300, Sanctum Command issued a second order. A new directive, transmitted to all relays, all fleet elements, all Sanctum facilities. The directive announced the mobilization of the 3rd Reserve Cadre, 420 vessels, and the emergency reactivation of the mechanism's oldest reserve hulls, a collection of 173 vessels pulled from long storage moorings in Sanctum-adjacent space. Combined with the surviving formation elements, Sanctum Command projected a total engagement strength of approximately 1,500 vessels when the reserves arrived. I logged the directive. I appreciated the precision of Sanctum Command's arithmetic. 1,500 was a carefully calculated number, representing the maximum immediately available strength the mechanism could field. The implicit message in the directive, for those who read it carefully, was that this was the entirety of what the mechanism had to commit. There was no 4th cadre. There were no further reserve hulls. The 1,500 was the mechanism's full hand against one ship. At hour 400, the 3rd Reserve Cadre and the reactivated reserve hulls had arrived and integrated with the surviving formation. Hull count, 1,481. The integration had gone well. The reserves were old vessels, in some cases very old, but they were functional, and their crews were experienced. Pilots and weapons officers who had served in previous engagements and had been stood down when the mechanism rotated them out. They were not the mechanism's finest ships. They were the mechanism's last ships. The contact's bearing had not changed. I should note here, for the completeness of this record, what the past 400 hours have been like at Relay Thresh-Kaur. I have described the engagement in terms of transmission logs and hull counts, and formation movements, because those are the things that belong in an official record. But this station has 17 personnel, and we have been living with this information for 400 hours, and the weight of that has not been nothing. Thresh-Kaur is a relay station, not a combat posting. We are signals officers and maintenance technicians, and an administrative staff that exists to ensure the outer relay network functions continuously. We are not trained for what we have been doing, which is sitting at our instruments and watching, in the granular detail that only a signals post can provide, the destruction of 4,000 ships over a period that has outlasted several rotation cycles. My personnel have handled it with what I can only describe as mechanism professionalism. We continue our work, the transmissions flow, the logs are kept. I have not had to issue an order about composure, because composure has been maintained without orders. But I am aware that we are aware of the bearing, and I am aware that awareness has its own weight. At hour 312, one of my technicians, a young designation, third posting, first outer relay assignment, came to the signal room while I was reviewing the day's transmission logs. He asked me whether I had calculated the timeline for the contact's arrival at Thresh-Kaur, assuming the formation failed to stop it. I had calculated it. I had calculated it at hour 15, and again at hour 100, and again at hour 260, when the formation's rate of loss accelerated. I did not tell him the specific figure, but I confirmed that yes, I had done the calculation. He nodded. He said he wanted to request permission to transmit a personal message to his family through the relay network. Administrative personal messages are permitted under SDN protocol, within bandwidth constraints. I granted the permission. He sent his message. Several other personnel sent messages over the following 2 days. I did not monitor the content of personal messages. I sent one of my own. That is the record of what the past 400 hours have been like at Thresh-Kaur. That is all I will say about it. What I noticed at hour 400, reviewing the accumulated sensor logs from the preceding weeks, was something I had not expected to see: consistency. Not in the contact's profile, which was never consistent, but in its behavior. The contact moved at a pace that I would have described, if I were being anthropomorphic, as deliberate. It engaged what was in its path. It did not pursue what was not. It did not accelerate into the formation's center when the formation compressed, nor did it slow when the formation spread. It maintained its pace. It maintained its heading. It had done this for 400 hours without variation. I have spent many hours thinking about what this means. I have arrived at an answer that I find unsettling in a way that the loss of ships does not, because the loss of ships is a thing I can count. What I cannot count is this: whatever is in that ship, whatever mind or process or directive drives it, does not seem to be experiencing this engagement as something that requires urgency. The contact is not in a hurry. It is working through the formation the way a process works through a queue. Methodical, patient, as if the outcome were not in question and the only variable was time. I have seen the mechanism's own combat logic described in similar terms. We are a civilization of processes. We classify, we calculate, we engage, we do not deviate, we do not hurry, we work through what is in front of us. I am looking at a vessel that does the same thing, and the vessel is winning. At hour 500, I transmitted a full engagement summary to Sanctum Command. I sent it in full, all of it, every sensor profile, every battle data packet, every targeting solution failure log, my analysis of the hull reset cycle, my notes on the contact's behavioral consistency, my plot of its bearing and the projected timeline for it to reach the outer relay line, of which Thresh-Kaur is the first station. I did not receive a substantive reply. I received an acknowledgement, a standard transmission received confirmation, and a directive to continue, logging and relaying. So I have continued logging and relaying. It is what I do. In the hours between hour 500 and hour 600, I attempted several analyses that I want to include in this record. Because if someone is building the archive entry for this vessel, they should know what approaches were tried and what they found. The first, I attempted to determine the contact's origin by backplotting its heading. If it has been on this bearing since before hour 0, if it came from somewhere specific and is going somewhere specific, then extending the bearing backward should point to an origin system. I extended it. The bearing backplots to a region of the galaxy, that is. By the mechanism's astronomical charts, a stellar density approximately 400 light-years from sanctum space. It contains 11 systems of interest, 8 of which are categorized in the archive as having no known intelligent habitation. 2 are categorized as contested, visited by the mechanism's survey vessels within the past 3 centuries, and found to have some form of biological complexity but not followed up. 1 is categorized as unknown. It was surveyed 700 years ago by an early mechanism expedition, and the survey vessel returned with data logs that were classified at command level. I do not have access to those logs. I have requested them from Sanctum Command's Archive Division. I have received no response. I do not know if the classified survey is relevant. I have noted it. The second analysis. I attempted to correlate the contact's engagement rate with any periodic variation in its activity, whether it showed any reduction in engagement intensity at regular intervals that might indicate crew rest, maintenance cycles, or power management demands. Warships sometimes have operational rhythms that reflect the biological needs of their crews or the thermal constraints of their weapons systems. If this vessel has such rhythms, there might be windows the formation could exploit. There is no correlation. The contact's engagement rate is determined entirely by target density. When targets are dense, the rate is higher. When targets spread, the rate is lower. There is no rest cycle. There are no windows. I have not drawn a conclusion from the absence of a periodic variation. The observation may mean nothing. Or it may mean that whatever operates this vessel does not share the constraints that apply to crewed ships, that it does not eat, does not sleep, does not lose weapons temperature between passes, does not require the intervals that biological crews and thermally limited weapons require. I will leave that interpretation for whoever reads this, because I find that I do not want to pursue it to its end. The third analysis was simpler. I counted transmissions across 500 hours. The contact had received no transmissions in any mode my instruments could detect. We had not hailed it. The mechanism had not attempted to negotiate or communicate. I note this not as a criticism of the mechanism's command decisions. By hour 7, when the engagement had already begun, the window for any alternative had arguably closed, but as a factual entry in the record, no communication was attempted. The contact made no communication of its own. Whatever it is here to accomplish, it pursued it in silence. I wonder, sometimes, whether silence is simply its nature, whether a vessel that changes its face every 14 minutes and has been working through our formation for 5 months on a bearing it has not deviated from by one measurable degree was ever going to stop and listen, whether there is anyone aboard to listen to us if we were to broadcast. I do not transmit these thoughts to Sanctum Command. They would not be useful. At hour 600, the combined force stood at 914 vessels. The contact had worked through the formation for 3 months. The rate had been variable. Higher during the periods when Sanctum Command directed concentrated engagement passes. Lower during the periods when the formation was maneuvering to reposition. The concentrated engagement passes had not worked. The repositioning had bought time but not changed the outcome. The contact's bearing was unchanged. I have run out of new analyses. The situation has become in its terrible way simple. The contact is working through our formation. Our formation cannot classify it. We cannot engage a vessel we cannot classify. We have the entire doctrine of the mechanism's warfighting capability, built on the step that must come before any weapon can be fired accurately. Know what you are shooting at, and this vessel refuses to be known. It presents a different face every 14 minutes. And 14 minutes is faster than the cycle that our entire engagement doctrine was designed around. And so every shot we fire is calibrated against yesterday's face. What troubles me most, reviewing the 600-hour record, is not the scale of the loss, though the scale is without precedent in the mechanism's operational history. What troubles me is the arithmetic. The mechanism built the recalculation advance on the premise that 3,412 vessels represents preponderant force, more than any unclassified contact could require. That premise is not wrong by a small margin. It is wrong in its root assumption, which is that preponderance of force can substitute for classification when classification fails. It cannot. You cannot fire more accurately by firing more. If every shot is wrong because you cannot know where the target is when the shot arrives, then 1,000 wrong shots and 3,000 wrong shots produce the same result against the hull. Only the expenditure of the formation differs. The formation has been expending itself for 600 hours. The The contact has not changed course. There are 914 vessels in that formation. I have watched them fight with genuine competence. They are not fools. They are not cowards. They are the mechanism's finest, in the best ships we have, firing the best solutions our analytics can produce. And they cannot hit the contact, because the contact is not where the solutions place it, and is not what the solutions assume it is. At hour 700, I received a transmission from the formation. Acting command had passed by this point to a vessel commander designated Kethara, the fourth acting commander since the destruction of the calculated purpose. Kethara's transmission was not a tactical report. It was addressed to Thresh-Kaur personally, to me, or to whoever held this station. It asked whether I had developed any theory of the contact's profile reset mechanism. Not a formal request, not a doctrine query. A genuine question from an officer who had been fighting the same ship for 700 hours and had run out of his own theories. I transmitted my honest answer. I believe the hull's surface layer actively reconfigures its emission properties on an approximately 14-minute cycle. I do not know the mechanism. I believe the cycle is autonomous, not directed from a crew station, but built into the hull's operational baseline, the way to drive field cycles without crew intervention. I believe this means there is no targeting solution the formation can build that will be accurate when the weapons arrive, unless the weapons can be delivered in under 14 minutes from profile acquisition, and the solution can be executed across all vessels simultaneously. I told him that I did not think this was operationally achievable with the current formation's coordination constraints. He replied within the hour. He thanked me. He said the formation would try a compressed timeline approach at hour 720. At hour 720, the remaining 806 vessels of the combined force. The formation had taken losses between hour 700 and my log entry, executed a simultaneous fire pass using targeting solutions that were 7 minutes old from the scan, pushing the solutions out to weapons in the fastest cycle the formation's coordination protocols could achieve. 7 minutes, still half a cycle. The fire was close, closer than any previous pass. The battle data showed impacts registered against the contact's hull, not proximity detonations. In empty space but actual contact with the hull surface. The impacts did not penetrate. The hull material density distribution the weapons had been calibrated against was still wrong, still the density profile from 7 minutes before, still a configuration the hull was no longer presenting. But close. The closest the formation had come. Vessel Commander Kethara transmitted at hour 722. He said the pass had been their best. He said the next one would be tighter. He would get the solution time under 6 minutes. He sounded, in the transmission, like someone who had found a thread to pull. I hope he is right. I write this having not yet received a transmission from the hour 722 attempted follow-up. I am writing this at hour 840. The combined formation stands at 231 vessels. I have received no transmission from Vessel Commander Kethara since hour 722. Which means either he is occupied with the engagement or he is dead. The battle data bursts are still arriving, automated transmissions from formation vessels with active sensor packages, not human-composed reports. I read them and log them and count. The contact's bearing is unchanged. I have begun to prepare this relay station for what is coming. There are 17 personnel at Thresh-Kaur. I have no weapons systems worth describing. A relay station is not a fortress. I have my instruments and my transmitters and my logs. What I have that may be worth something is a record. 900 hours of sensor profiles and targeting data and battle data packets and analysis. A record that says, in exhaustive detail, what does not work against this vessel. The mechanism is thorough. We archive everything. Somewhere in the archive, this record will sit alongside the 11,209 vessel type entries. As the 11,210th entry, the one that reads, no classification achieved, and below that a notation, see engagement records, 417 cycle, full archive reference, 900 hours, 3,412 vessels engaged, final survivor count to follow. I am going to continue logging until the instruments stop. That is all I know how to do. At hour 860, I lost contact with the main formation's battle data relay. The automated bursts stopped. This does not necessarily mean the formation is destroyed. It may mean the relay vessels within the formation are no longer in position to transmit on a heading that reaches Thresh-Kaur. I do not know. I have marked hour 860 in my log as the point at which the formation's data stream went silent. At hour 890, my long-range sensor grid at Thresh-Kaur acquired an independent contact, a single vessel, bearing toward this station, distance, within the grid's maximum resolution range. I have spent the past 10 hours running sensor scans of this contact. I have collected 4 profiles, each taken at 20-minute intervals. I wanted to compare them. Each of the 4 profiles is different. I know what I am looking at. I have logged it. I will not pretend surprise. The contact is 38.4 kilometers in primary hull extent. Its hull surface at this range appears layered, accumulated plating, reconfigured systems, the evidence of continuous operation across a span of time I cannot determine. It is moving at a steady velocity on a bearing that extended, passes through this relay station, and continues on toward the Kethara home star. I have a muster count. I have been cross-referencing the formation's battle data bursts, the second cadre's arrival count, the reserve hull reactivation figures, all of it. I have a number. I do not know if it is precise, the final hours of the formation produced. Incomplete data, but I have it. Of the 3,412 vessels of the recalculation advance, the 600 vessels of the second recalculation cadre, the 420 of the third reserve cadre, and the 173 reactivated reserve hulls. A total engagement commitment of 4,605 mechanism vessels. I count 11 survivor contacts on my sensor grid. 11, moving at speed, on bearings away from the contact's approach heading. Not toward Thresh-Kaur, away, any direction but this one. I do not blame them. The contact itself has not deviated from its course by any measurable degree since hour 15. I have 914 hours of logs. No, I have misstated. I have 890 hours from the formation's data, plus 10 hours from my own direct observation. 900 hours in total. I began this record at hour 0 and I will end it. In whatever sense it ends very soon. The station is quiet. We are 17 personnel at our stations. The instruments are running. The transmitters are at full power. Everyone here knows what the grid is showing on the navigation chart. And everyone is doing their work. That is what I have to say about the people at this station. It is enough. I am transmitting this record now, all of it, to every relay in the mechanism's outer and inner grid, to Sanctum Command, to whatever archive receiver is still active. I am transmitting it at maximum power on every channel Thresh-Kaur can reach, because I want this record to survive even if this station does not. 900 hours, 4,605 vessels, 11 survivors confirmed, classification of contact, not achieved. The contact is not stopping. It was not stopping when the advance first engaged it at hour 7. It was not stopping when the calculated purpose was destroyed at hour 22. It was not stopping during any of the 788 hours of continuous engagement that followed. It was not stopping when I acquired it on my own grid at hour 890. It is not stopping now. I do not know what it wants. If want is a concept that applies to it. I know the bearing it is on. I know what is behind me on that bearing. I know what is behind Thresh-Kaur when Thresh-Kaur is behind it. I am transmitting the following as the final entry in this log, to be appended to the full record and broadcast on all channels. To any mechanism command element that receives this, the contact will reach the outer relay line in approximately 6 to 9 hours, depending on whether its approach velocity shifts. Thresh-Kaur cannot stop it. Nothing on the outer relay line can stop it. Whatever you have in sanctum space, whatever vessels remain in the inner reserve, whatever facilities have defense systems, whatever can be brought to bear before the contact arrives, that is what you have. Build solutions in under 14 minutes. Not 14 minutes, under. The 7-minute pass at hour 720 produced the first confirmed hull contact in 900 hours. There is something in that number. 5 minutes might work. 3 might. The formation never found out. The relay station at Vethon Secondary is 19 light hours behind me on the contact's bearing. Give them this record, and give them the compressed timeline approach before they attempt engagement. It is the closest thing to advice this log can offer. Do not file this under sensor anomaly. Do not route it through the standard classification queue. Treat the entry I have started, the one that will be labeled No Classification Achieved, as the primary archive document for everything this vessel represents. The profile data is attached. All 87 profiles. Study them. Find the pattern I could not find. The mechanism is thorough. The mechanism is patient. If there is a solution in the data, the mechanism will find it. I believe that. I am Vrethon, Commander Designation, Signals Authority, Relay Thresh-Kaur. I have been at this board for 900 hours. I have logged everything. The contact is 17 light minutes from this station and holding course. Transmission ends.